So in this video, I will be changing my oil in my Yamaha Tracer 9 GT. It's 2022 model. I am at approximately 179-ish miles or so. I like to do my oil changes early and often when I'm breaking in a bike. And this will be a very basic covering of the process and how it is done. This is probably one of the easiest oil changes on a motorcycle that you can do yourself at home. And of course, there are a few other maintenances you definitely want to tackle when you're breaking in a bike, such as the control cables and tightening of your chain, inspecting your brakes, things like that. But this one's fairly easy, and so are the other ones. Maybe down the road I'll put together something on how those are done as well for people who've never done them. $179.3 miles. Doing that first oil change. We'll do it again at 600. Let's get this plug out of there. Interesting. Saw a video online of a gentleman did the same thing with about 40 less miles, and his oil was looking pretty terrible. This oil is not fantastic as it is braking oil, but definitely a much different hue than what his was looking like. All right, and we're off to the races. Let me get that oil filter out of there. I got that cranked on there pretty good. Definitely wouldn't have been able to bare hand that. Actually, that's really not bad looking. I do pretty much every one of my bikes early and at 600. And I have to say that is about as good as I've ever seen. When it comes to color, not too bad. Now, another thing I like to do is some hooch back in the road, tip it over and let that oil run out. Practice purposes. Make sure your oil's running out. Let it all run down quick. Give it another lean both ways. Just as I'm trying to be thorough. All right, it has now dripped out quite a bit more after tipping it left and right. It's important if you do that, a couple of sides. Not that hard to do. I know it's an extra pain in the butt. Stat adds a couple of minutes, but it's good to be thorough, especially if it's your first oil change. You definitely want to get as much of that crud out of there as possible. Notice that I have the foil on there. Anytime I change oil on any of my bikes, if there's an exhaust pipe routed anywhere near the filter or the drain plug, I like to always cover it with something like foil. Easy to get on, easy to get off. That way if you get a couple of drops of oil or maybe a big splash onto somewhere where you're working, you don't get it on your exhaust. Typically you want to do this when the bike is pretty warm. I believe mine was 150 some odd degrees when I started this process. So plenty warm to keep that oil nice and runny to get it all out. Next step, I'm going to put everything back together. Start with my drain plug and my crush washer. Don't want to forget that. And gonna reseat the, well, I'm actually gonna lubricate that gasket on the oil filter and reseat that and start adding some oil back in there. All right, as I get started, I need to make sure to remove the old crush washer. A little hard to do with one hand sometimes. There we go. Gonna put the new one on. Always use the same orientation. Got it on there. And always make sure you are putting on your crush washers before doing this. I like to thread it in a couple of threads, then use a rag to just kind of clean everything up. And hand tight it as much as I can. Make sure there's no oils, fluids, or anything. Clean up all the surfaces. Fortunately, the oil filter from Yamaha has a plastic cover on it. It comes pre-lubricated, so you can get that puppy right on in there. Grab a fresh rag. Move my old oil out of the way. And cinch that puppy down. Never want to use any tools to tighten your oil filter. All right, and now I'm going to use a torque wrench and snug up that bolt as well. One final note, when getting ready to put your oil in, I recommend an angled funnel. Here, I'll show you why. One of these standard funnels doesn't really work too well with that clutch housing. You will just pour your oil all over the floor, unless you've got someone to stand on the other side and you tip it, and that's a bit weird. So just get an angled funnel, you heathens. And away you go. Once again, always use your Yamaha lube. Match your weight to your climate. I live in a very hot, sweltering Texas climate. We've had a pretty bad heat wave, so I like to do a 50 and 50 for that extra bit of heat. Don't really have cold weather anytime on the radar, so this oil will not be there for too long anyway. About 600 miles, might even hit that by the weekend, or by the end of the weekend. It is Friday night, so very likely. So just take your time. There's a funky angle you have to pour, but make sure not to spill any of that precious Yamaha lube. Make sure to top off with 3.38 quarts if you change the oil filter, like I did. And also, I forgot to mention before, 32 foot-pounds of torque on that drain plug. Try not to strip those. Those tend to be a bit of a hassle. I am a service advisor for a motorcycle dealership, and we do have people make those mistakes often. It can cost you a lot of money, so follow those recommended torque specs, folks. They can save you a huge hassle down the road, and it's also a nice sense of accomplishment when you can get something done without having to get somebody else involved. All right, I've got 3.38 in there. Time to pull out the funnel. Make sure that's nice and clean, yeah. And get my plug back in here. Well, there's a little funky and hard to sit in there. There it goes. There she goes. And make sure never to use a tool on that. Just needs to be hand tight. Otherwise, you risk breaking it. It is plastic. You do not want to break that. You'll have to get another one. Let's see what temp that motor's at. I haven't taken my time. We're at 123. Let's fire her up and see what she says. Now Now that the oil change is done, it's often a good time to inspect your oil level. Make sure you got between the crosshatch marks. Obviously you have a lower and an upper mark. You don't want to go too low, and you definitely don't want to go too high. Both can present different issues, so it's best to always add the oil slowly and check a couple of times if you're not sure about your measurements. And on that note, it is time to go ride this puppy. So everybody stay safe, stay chill, and as always, enjoy the ride.